Well, according to our plan, last week we combined the two lessons, the second and third lessons from Peter, about Peter. And today we're looking at lesson 8, James and John, which is technically next week's lesson, but next week is our meeting. So we'll be hearing Brother Webster then, and then we'll continue on the week after that, Lord willing, with the next lesson, back on track. Peter said in 2 Peter 3:18, "Grow in the grace and knowledge of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ." Growth is the key there. The fact that he said that indicates that followers of Jesus aren't ever supposed to be satisfied with wherever they are spiritually. Their spiritual status in the present should never be good enough, so to speak. We should always strive to grow further. Leave the desires and ambitions of the world behind, as we should when we obey the gospel, and then abandon our former conduct and seek to allow the Lord to live through us, as Paul said in Galatians 4:19. And when we develop in knowledge, we will progress beyond the fundamental things, the elementary principles. Progress, grow, press on. Paul says in Philippians 3:14, press on toward the goal. All those ideas have the built-in the concept of moving forward and upward and not staying where you are. Of course, the worst thing would be to go backwards, but even staying still is, in a way, moving backwards. So transformation and continuing to move forward in that transformation. And that kind of growth occurred and is very observable in the lives of the two men that we're going to study today, James and John. They were brothers who were eager to follow Jesus when they were called to be his disciples in Mark 1, but they were far from what they would become at that time. But Jesus sort of gave them a new name, as it were, sons of thunder, and that may say something about their character, sons of thunder. Their dad wasn't named Thunder, just so you know. That's not what he meant when he said that. But eventually, John became the apostle that we know of as the apostle of love, because he talked about love so much, and so many of Jesus' quotes about love are found in John's gospel. And John, 1 John, is full of emphasis on love, loving one another, showing love. And James, his brother, would die at the hands of Herod. He was going to be the first apostle to be martyred, in the most extreme sense of the term, martyr. We also see John's growth being recognized by the Jewish leaders in Acts chapter 4. They recognized that he had been with Jesus. Might be an indication of his growth. They could tell by him. He was not an educated man. He was just a common, normal guy, but he spoke with boldness and authority and knowledge. And they recognized then that he had been with Jesus. John was different because of the time that he spent with the Lord. And I think that was true of everybody that spent any time with the Lord. He was no longer an overzealous type. We're going to see some examples of that in this text. But he turned into a mature apostle who boldly and confidently spoke the gospel of Jesus. The son of thunder became the apostle of love. So, Mark chapter 1 is the record of when these two men are called by Jesus. We're going to be in Mark 1, then we're going to be in Mark 3, and then we'll be in Luke chapter 9. Mark chapter 1, verses 18 through 20 says, and immediately, this is after Jesus says, follow me and I'll make you become fishers of men. Immediately they left their nets and followed him. And going on a little farther, he saw James the son of Zebedee and John his brother, who were in their boat mending the nets. And immediately he called them, and they left their father Zebedee in the boat with the hired servants and followed him. Same occasion here as Simon and Andrew. He immediately went to them and told them the same thing he had told Simon, Peter, and Andrew. Follow me. Or, if you do follow me, in that case, he said, I'll make you become fishers of men. And the key here is how immediately, same as Simon and Andrew, immediately he called them, and the implication is equally immediately they left their net, they left their father Zebedee in the boat with the hired servants and followed Jesus. It seemed to be that simple for them. Now, in verse 18, it just mentions Peter and Andrew leaving their nets, which probably symbolized all of the fishermen profession. But here specifically mentioned they left their father. Not forever and in every way, but they apparently were not going to be taking over the fishing business from Dad, because here they go, and they're going to go follow Jesus now. At that time, I don't guess it would necessarily imply that they would never be coming back to be fishermen, but we know ultimately this decision was permanent. So, giving credit where credit's due, when Jesus called, they answered, and they answered appropriately. They followed him. They left everything, including their father and the hired servants, and followed Jesus. But some of the character that we see is not as flattering. It seems only fair that some of the other apostles have some slightly less than flattering character revelations instead of just Peter every time. So it's fitting maybe in that way. But in Mark chapter 3, verses 13 through 19, it says, he went up on the mountain and called to him those whom he desired, and they came to him. And he appointed 12. This is actually the appointing of the apostles, should have said. He appointed 12, whom he also named apostles, so that they might be with him, and he might send them out to preach, and have authority to cast out demons. He appointed the 12, Simon, to whom he gave the name Peter, James the son of Zebedee, and John the brother of James, to whom he gave the name Boanerges. It's the best you're going to get from me. That is, sons of thunder. And then, of course, Andrew, Philip, Bartholomew, Matthew, Thomas, James the son of Alphaeus, and Thaddeus, and Simon the Zealot, and Judas Iscariot. So, right here in the naming of the apostles in Mark's account, we're not told the exact circumstance when he gave them this name. We're just told that he gave them the name Sons of Thunder. Now, we'll have to speculate a little bit, I guess, as to why this would be, but what are some kinds of traits that you might think of that might give somebody the nickname Sons of Thunder? A son of thunder. Okay, a temper maybe. What's that? Loud. Loud? Thunder's loud, isn't it? Booming, and, sudden, kind of, which could kind of go with a temper, like thunder. Now, there are some thunders, depending on, the kind of storm, I guess. Some do sort of ease their way in, kind of rumble a little bit. But, the thunders that I like the best are the ones that are, just you see the flash and you know it's coming, and then boom, there it is. It's, shaking the foundations of your house or whatever. That's usually what we would think of when we think of thunder. So for somebody to be a son of thunder almost gives the impression of somebody who is very hasty, maybe, and sort of like Peter is, or was, rather. Very bold, goes big, kind of. Powerful.
But also, like, I don't know, this might be, like, maybe comes by honest, because if you're the son of something, then you're, like, taking after, or maybe I'm totally misunderstanding that.
Well, I think sometimes son of just means, like, you are of that ilk, that you are like a son of thunder. So everything that we would attribute to thunder is attributed to these people. That seems to be the impression. So the thing that we don't know about this is if it was meant to be a compliment or just a matter of fact. Now, is it like they're sons of thunder in a good way, or is it more of a negative thing, or maybe a little bit of both? Yeah, Dean?
We think it's thunder, it follows lightning, like you said.
Yeah.
So it follows. They're following, they were willing to follow Jesus.
Yeah.
Jesus was the lightning, and they were the sons of thunder, so they were following him.
Maybe. That's even deeper than I would have gone into. Yeah. Uh-huh.
If you look in, you see it says, gave the name, however you say that, Boanerges.
Yeah.
That is sons of thunder.
Yeah.
You looked at, I mean, what is that big name? I mean, what did you find anything about that? Did you look for, what does that word mean in its original language? Is it Greek or what is it?
That word is, I'm not sure the language. I would assume that it's an Aramaic name.
This says it's either Hebrew or Syriac or something.
Okay, Hebrew,
But it
the
means thunder.
Aramaic. That's
Thunder.
Aramaic. That's just the word that is translated sons of thunder. So it's the same thing as sons of thunder, but like we said, power is implied in that. And again, there may be a hint of sort of overmuch, So we're going to see that, or we do see it in other instances of James and John's life that sort of plays out this name. Jesus typically knew what he was doing, right? And naming them like this, he was pretty good at that too. Mm-hmm.
Well, Jesus knew it was going to take a lot of boldness to be his disciple or his apostle.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, that was probably a very good attribute that they would just have to be owned.
Yeah, that's the thing. That, just like with Peter, had some great traits, even his negative traits. Jesus had the ability to see the good, not see the good in everything in terms of overlooking the negative altogether, but seeing how something could be good if only just tweak the knobs a little bit, dial it in. And that is so true to life because there are so many assets that people have in their lives that you just think they could do so much good. That will be such an excellent quality for the Lord, except they're not using it for that. And one of my favorite movies growing up was The Mighty Ducks. It's like a Disney type. I think it's Disney. It's a hockey movie. Okay, and in D2 The Mighty Ducks, the sequel, they got these other people, and there's this one kid that was like one of the fastest skaters that anybody had ever seen. And they were scouting him out. It's like, man, he's so fast, nobody would ever be able to catch him. But there's a problem. He didn't know how to stop. So it's like he would just skate as fast as he could, and then the only thing that's going to ever be able to stop him is the wall at the rink. So it's like, if we could just dial that in, if we could get him to learn how to stop, his speed would be an extremely valuable asset. So with our spiritual and personality traits, it's like Peter had this trait that got him in trouble a lot, but if we could just dial it in, boy, he doesn't have to get rid of that trait. He just needs to fine-tune it for good. Yes, sir. Do you have something?
Actually, it's when we're talking about John and James,
Mm-hmm.
you know, the apostles had plans for, Jesus had plans for the apostles,
Mm-hmm.
because no one knew what was going on at the time when this was going on. The apostles getting selected. No one knew about that. So it's like, people didn't know that he was selecting these 7 men to change the world.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm not a big reader on the Bible. I don't read it a lot of the time because I have problems reading. So I don't read it all the time. So I'm not going to try to quote the Bible when I'm saying stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But when I look at the Bible now, and I'm looking at different versions of the Bible, I always go back to the King James version, and it's like I try to read it, and it's like too hard.
Mm-hmm.
It's harder to read that. So for me, it's like these Bible studies we have here. This is a good thing because we're learning about the Bible and not just having a situation go wrong.
Yeah.
We're learning the truth and not the wrong.
Yep. Yep.
A lot of churches now have gone away from the Bible.
That is true. And sad. Very sad.
It is, but there's one thing. Our church, this church here, could change that.
If we would speak out.
Yeah.
Yep, that's the thing. And you're right. At this time, early on in Jesus' ministry, you know, Jesus had it all figured out.
Yeah.
And he had a plan for these men. And he knew he picked them on purpose. And
Yeah.
James and John, as we're going to see here in Luke 9 in the next little part, they weren't perfect like any of us aren't perfect. But Jesus knew that by the end of it, he would be able to help to shape them and mold them in a way that would make them able to change the world, like you said. Mm-hmm.
You know, that's the thing. It's like he is choosing 7 men just to change the world. These 7 men have no idea what they're going to get into because they don't know the fight they're going to get into. They don't know anything like that. They're just all of a sudden being chosen to come to follow Jesus, and it's like, what do you have? How would you even recognize that?
Mm-hmm.
How would you even think about it? You're literally following one guy that you don't even know him. Like, we don't even know, at the time, they didn't even know about Jesus. They are following him now with just faith.
Yep. A lot of faith in him.
Yeah.
And
But I look back at something my mom had in her jewelry. She had this thing with the mustard seed. The mustard seed is our faith
mm-hmm.
because it's tiny.
Yep.
But faith is tiny too.
And it can do big things.
Yeah.
Yep. Even being small, just a little bit amount of faith can do
A lot.
more than you would ever think. And they had to have that faith. You know,
Yeah.
it started maybe as a mustard seed, but then it started to grow and grow.
Yeah.
And James and John and their character, and really all the characters we've looked at so far, at least in, you know, we don't see a whole lot of the earlier life of Mary and Elizabeth and those people, and even John the Baptizer for that matter. But here's, in Luke 9, we get to see maybe a little example of why they were called sons of thunder. Okay? Here's what it says. When the days, this is Luke 9, beginning in verse 51. When the days drew near for him to be taken up, that is Jesus, he set his face to go to Jerusalem. And he sent messengers ahead of him who went and entered a village of the Samaritans to make preparations for him. But the people did not receive him because his face was set toward Jerusalem. In other words, because he was en route to Jerusalem, and which was the Samaritans' enemies and rivals. So sounds like it's a confusing sounding verse, because what does that mean? They didn't receive him because he had set his face toward Jerusalem. Probably means they knew who he was. He was a Jew, and they hated the Jews. So, or the Judea Jews anyway. The Samaritans and Jews hated each other. And when his disciples James and John saw it, they said, Lord, do you want us to tell fire to come down from heaven and consume them? But he turned and rebuked them, and they went on to another village. Your version might say, have the words added in there that say, as Elijah did. But whether that's supposed to be in there or not, that's clearly the kind of thing they had in mind. If you remember back when Elijah did that very thing, really God did that through Elijah. Whenever the wicked king was sending soldiers to come and capture him from a cave that he was living in at the time, fire came down and consumed him. So here, Jesus is coming to Samaria, or coming to Jerusalem through Samaria. And if you remember, we pointed out many times the Jews typically, at least in many cases, did not go through Samaria, even though it was the most direct route. They went around Samaria simply because they hated them so much. So Jesus did not follow that practice. We've already seen on one occasion when he deliberately went through Samaria to go back to Galilee, and now he's deliberately going through Samaria to go back down to Judea. But as was often the case, he would send some of the men before him before the party of people that were coming anyway, however many were with him at this time, physically, literally with him, to get things ready for when they all get there. And they come there, and the Samaritans said, no, we don't have anything anywhere for him. And James and John did not like this at all. Kind of like Joshua back in the Old Testament got jealous for Moses whenever some other people were prophesying, and Joshua was like, what are they doing prophesying? You know, we need to do something about that. And Moses is like, calm down. You know, I wish all of y'all had prophecy. You know, I wish everybody in Israel was prophesying. Well, James and John did not like the Samaritans, and they probably had a little bit of personal animosity built into this because of the relationship between Jews and Samaritans. They said, Lord, just like this is a Peter statement if there ever was one. No offense to Peter, but it just sounds like the best intentions. They meant well. They were defending their master, their teacher, who they understood was the Messiah, the Christ from God. Do you want us to burn these villages to the ground? In fact, that's a paraphrase that's probably not even accurate, because they said, do you want us to tell fire to come down and consume them? Burn them alive. Burn them into a puff of smoke. That sounds like a son of thunder. It was quick, it was rash, and it was big. You know, that's a big suggestion that a lot of people would maybe be afraid to even say out loud. Like, do you want me to go kill all these people? Like that could be even a joke that nobody would want to make because it's a little over the top, but they were doing it out of defense of him. And Jesus rebukes them.
Because if he had wanted that, he could have done it himself.
Yeah, he could have done that. And again, they had the best intentions. They want to serve him, right? So even though he could have done it and they knew he could have done it, they're offering to do it. You want us to do it? We'll do it for you. Let us do it. That's the thing is,
Well, it would have been up to
in
God.
a way, we see a good example of faith because they seem to be totally confident that that would be possible. But at the same time, it's like, why do they think that automatically, just because they don't like what they did, that God would be behind that, you know? So,
Because people were mistreating Jesus, and they were like, this can't, you know.
yeah, this cannot stand.
Yeah.
How dare them not let him stay here? Who do they think they are?
It's going to get a lot worse than people mistreating him.
Yeah, they needed to learn a lesson here. And this could be a lesson that a lot of people today need to learn. Sometimes, and Jesus is always, whether he's already said it or will say it, every single thing Jesus does is either backed up by something he's already taught or will be backed up by something he will teach in the future. Take, for instance, turn the other cheek, as the paraphrase version is called. Somebody slaps you on the right cheek, give them the left one. What's the idea there? Don't retaliate. If somebody slaps you on the right cheek, don't slap him on the right cheek, but you let him slap your left cheek. You see, that's the idea. Don't retaliate is the key. Jesus is teaching them this again in another way, by rebuking them for even suggesting that idea, which also shows the Lord's concern, his selflessness, his concern for other people, and I said selflessness, but his utter and absolute lack of self prioritizing. He did not ever, for the sake of his own saving face or one-upping somebody, or if I let that slide, what will people think of me? You know, and that kind of thing, like a king might do, or some wicked, self-serving king. Look what they've done, we better do something, or else I'll look weak, you know. Or somebody said this, I better, you know, censor them or shut them down, or else, you know, who knows how will I look if I let that stand. Jesus never operated under those kinds of worldly, selfish mentalities. He cares more about the people that have just rejected him than he does his own reputation as far as worldly standards are concerned.
At
Yes,
least
sir?
he did, I'm sorry. If you had your hand up.
You know, we talk about that all the time with the seven apostles. You know, everyone, they're all leading, they're all wanting to help Jesus, but when doing it, they're trying to teach people the truth.
Yeah.
And then people are revoking them because they don't want the truth.
Mm-hmm.
They want to live the way they are now.
Yep.
And, you know, we live in a world with that already. Because outside of the church, we have a community that believes that doesn't want to believe in Jesus. They want to believe in something else.
Yep.
And, you know, we learn about that. We look at it like, what can we do to change that? How can we change it? But the way we change it is going out and inviting people to church, inviting them to lawn,
Mm-hmm.
because we can teach them this. We may have the world will be better. But,
Yep.
you know, most churches have gone away from actually teaching the people outside of that.
Yeah, you're right. The way to help people and to change that is to teach them, not by setting them on fire. You know, consuming them with fire.
Well, at least they asked, though. That's what I was thinking. They didn't just do it. They didn't just chop the
Yeah,
banana
well, if they had
off.
tried, they would have found out quickly that
True, yeah.
they wouldn't have been able to. But, the thing is, we have to think about the impact that this would have on people that heard. Like, if Jesus did this or allowed them to do this, don't you think that would spread really quick, the news of that? You know what that Jesus does? If you don't receive him, he'll burn you alive. Or he'll bring some sort of divine judgment on you, and you're a puff of smoke. That's going to spread like wildfire, no pun intended, because that's a big deal. But at the same time, I can't help but think that this, what he actually did, would also spread. Maybe not as quickly, and maybe not as, obviously, but this would definitely have moved people, this kind of behavior. Yeah, Wayne?
He could have added in there, James, John, you're right. One day they will be consumed.
Yeah.
Because if you reject the word, that's definitely going to happen. You're going to burn.
But how will we teach them, if they did it right then, they wouldn't have any hope. So Jesus just says, pump the brakes here. Dean?
I think lesson 2 is about self-control and patience.
Yep.
Because some of the things here, I think we could learn from that situation, because he was showing them, be patient, wait, and
Yep.
have self-control. And that's one thing that we as Christians, every one of us, we have to have that self-control in our life. If we don't, well, then we're going to make some mistakes.
Absolutely.
Speaking of that, you said patience. The thing about that is, patience, a lot of the people out here now don't have it. They don't have the patience to wait for God to answer. They want to just have the answer then and there.
Yeah. Sometimes I don't have patience either.
We all have.
Yeah.
We all have the same issue.
Yep.
But I've been going through some stuff lately that I just have stood back and was watching what was going on in our world. I have mental health. I have a mental health problem with stuff. So I'm literally sitting here listening to this, and it's like, I look at the world now differently, because it's like, it's chaos.
Mm-hmm.
The world is chaos now. Because everything that's going on now is getting worse.
Yep.
And people aren't going to God. They're doing stuff like protesting, and people are getting to the point they don't want to allow people to choose for themselves.
People have always had a tendency to run from God. And, this here in Luke 9 is a good example of why it's best for God to be in control. Because here's what even men that would, at least, I don't have any doubt they were, excellent men in the first place, or Jesus wouldn't have called them. I think probably even Judas Iscariot had good qualities, or else he wouldn't have been chosen. He wasn't chosen just to be the betrayer. It's not really how prophecy works. But James and John were good men, and yet they got tripped over themselves here. And Jesus brought them back in line. Yeah, Dave?
I think when you get to look at Acts, I don't know if you got it in the study yet, but
Mm-hmm.
you'll find in Acts that James and John would be no longer looked at sons of thunder.
Yep.
Was Herod, they killed James with a sword for
Mhm.
his faith, and then put John was persecuted later on, as Revelation talks about.
Yep.
So when the Spirit came on out things to all the apostles, their lives were totally changed forever.
Yeah, especially with John. See, we don't get to know much about James, but we know almost as much about John as any any of the apostles, with the exception of maybe Peter. But John wrote more books of the New Testament than Peter, and so we get to know him through his writings. But the thing is, whereas Peter's traits didn't really seem to change all that much, they just evolved into better use. We almost see a night and day contrast with John. He's not even like a son of thunder in the sense of, at least later in his life, that he was still just as thunderous, but just for the Lord now, but almost like the opposite of thunder. He's the one that's always talking about love and, my little children and, all this gentleness and tenderness, and Jesus obviously helped to bring that out in him. Not that he didn't have any of it before, but this is an example of when this kind of thing came up. This isn't the last example that we have of James and John stepping in it a little bit. And they even got their mom involved, asking Jesus, whenever you come into your kingdom, let us sit at your right hand and your left. That's another example of James and John, like David said, before the big transition or transformation took place. But this is just a wonderful example of why, I've got on the sign out here pretty much all the time, Jeremiah said, it's not in man to direct his own steps. Man can't do it. God is the one that needs to direct your steps. Because when man tries to direct his own steps, this is the kind of thing that comes up. But Jesus shows the real way, the correct way. No, I don't want you to call down fire from heaven and consume them. I wish some versions I should have said also, add a little quote of Jesus here. Okay, you do not know what manner of spirit you are. For the Son of Man came not to destroy people's lives, but to save them. There seems to be sufficient reason why that should be moved to the margin, like it is in my Bible. But it's nothing outrageous or anything. I mean, it's a true statement that's said elsewhere, and Jesus even said a similar thing elsewhere. The Son of Man did not come to destroy people, but to save people. And how will I save them if I destroy them first? They won't even have the chance to be saved. That's the key. It's not that God came not to destroy people but to save them, and so he will never inflict punishment on anybody. But he's not going to do it without giving them sufficient opportunity to be saved first. And no matter how long our lives are, or relatively short our lives may be, we all have had, up to this point, more than enough time to turn to the Lord. It's just a matter of if we're willing to do it. So James and John are a good example of some bad traits and some good traits. But I just can't help but see in this so many personal, individual examples and applications. Like, I'm trying to talk with somebody about the gospel and they shut me down, or they reject me. And then, you know what I might have a tendency to do because it's me talking? I'm going to make it about me. That's almost in human nature. I'm going to make this thing about me. I don't think of it like that, but it just comes out. Personal. And therefore, I'm going to do something about it. I'm going to tell them something. I'm going to say something. I'm going to throw in a jab in there. Jesus gives us the example. It's not about you. Don't stop making it about you. It's about me and them, and I don't want you to burn them to the ground. Yeah, Wayne?
That is said, for though we walk in the flesh, we do not war according to the flesh. But the flesh has a lot of control over each of us because of our fleshly nature. And it makes the statement, our spiritual growth will occur when we spend time in prayer, Bible study, corporate worship, fellowship with the saints. In other words, you choose how you want to spend your time. And all of our choices in life come with consequences, either favorable or unfavorable. So just be wise.
Yep. And, you know, just like he would tell his apostles later, if you go into a village and they don't receive you, doesn't that sound familiar? Sounds like what happened here in Samaria. He didn't say, call upon God to consume them in heavenly fire. He said, brush the dust off, shake the dust off your feet, and move to another village. By the time he taught them that, he had already solidified that example right here. And that's immediately, that their minds will be like, I know how to do that because I've seen Jesus do it. So no matter how much I have to strive within myself, I just suck it up and do it like Jesus did it.